Cool. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Richardson. Welcome to Yarn 2, a next-generation package manager. I really appreciate you all showing up. I know it's been quite an interesting day. I hope that you enjoy this, and I hope that anybody watching online enjoys this as well. I think this is a really exciting topic. So, like many good things, it all started with a tweet. In August of 2019, I replied to a tweet and mentioned that I had tried out the Yarn feature plug and play. Mal, the lead maintainer of Yarn, replied encouraging me to try out Yarn 2. Now, Yarn 2 was still pre-release at the time, but I gave it a try. I was impressed. I also fairly quickly encountered a minor edge case bug, which got fixed quite promptly. And that was over 2 years ago. Now, Yarn has come a long way since then. In fact, it's more appropriate to call it Yarn Berry at this point. Berry was the project name for the Yarn rewrite. Yarn 3 has now been released and is still built on the Berry codebase. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk about Yarn Classic, the 1.x version. Yarn made a big splash when it came on the scene a few years back. It was an alternative to the default package manager at the time, package manager then and now, NPM. Yarn promised better performance and more reliable, repeatable builds, in part due to a unique lock file. I've used Yarn fairly consistently for several years, and I've really enjoyed using it. As proof of Yarn's success, many of the innovations developed by Yarn, like the lock file, have been incorporated into NPM. So, like NPM now supports lock files and has significantly improved performance since Yarn was released. Yarn Berry is the name for a significant re-architecture and rewrite of the Yarn project. It improves on a variety of features from the original Yarn and adds a few more. It also encourages a really impressive install strategy called plug and play. Now, in prior iterations of this talk, I've simply used the name Yarn 2, and this is no longer accurate because, like I said, version 3 has now been released. The difference between 2 and 3 is comparatively insignificant, almost nothing like the changes from 1 to 2. For that reason, for clarity, I'll try to use the name Yarn Berry throughout this talk. If you hear me say Yarn 2, realize that applies to the entire Yarn Berry line, essentially. So the first and most important thing is don't panic. Yarn Classic is not going away. When Yarn Berry was first released, there was significant concern in the Node ecosystem. There was concern that current stuff would break and the ecosystem would be harmed as a result. Now, when we get to the demo, you'll notice that I'm still using Yarn 1, Yarn Classic, as my global Yarn installation. That is the plan going forward. There are no plans in even the medium future to change that from using Yarn 1 as the global Yarn installation. Now, to use Yarn Berry, we install it in a specific project, and you'll see that. Since the release of Yarn 1.0, Yarn has supported a feature that I like to call version pinning. With version pinning, you can embed a specific version of Yarn into your project. Commit it to source control. It's kind of awesome. Once you've done this, everyone who clones your project and runs Yarn will use that embedded version, regardless of what version they've installed globally on their machine. Now, you've been using that feature for some time at Kroger, and it's been really great for us. We've really enjoyed it. It's in the same way that a lock file ensures repeatable builds, this makes all your package management more consistent. I don't know if some of you have ever dealt with the issue where you've had a Yarn upgrade and some people upgrade and some people didn't and cause subtle changes in the lock file as a result. And then you get these merge conflicts. It's no fun. If you just simply embed the version of Yarn, you never have that complexity in any way. And you can essentially say, oh, we're going to just make sure that everyone upgrades to the newest by upgrading it inside the project. There's actually a new node feature that recently came out with the Node 16. I'm just kind of catching up on this, that actually enables the management of this inside Node itself. It's kind of a built-in feature. So they're actually recommending starting to move towards that, but still figuring out exactly what that looks like. For the time being, this works on pretty much every Node version that's still under support. So you can stick with that. So let's talk about what's new with Yarn Berry. The Yarn source code has been refactored to be highly modular, utilizing a plugin-based architecture. Much of what we'd see as the core functionality of Yarn is implemented as plugins. If Yarn doesn't offer a feature or a command that you want, you can add it yourself via a plugin. I hope to see a lot of interesting developments in this space. Yarn 2's console output is also very clean and easy to read. Each step in the process and the it clearly identifies each step in the process and the associated warnings or errors. Also, each output message has a specific code which can be easily referenced in documentation or searched online. In fact, some of these you can even click on and it'll take you to the Yarn documentation. Yarn 2 also offers enhanced support for workspaces. Workspaces were already a big selling point for Yarn Classic, but Yarn Berry has made some big advancements in this area for improved developer experience. If you use workspaces, this could be a big deal for you. If you don't, it may not make much difference. Yarn also contains the new command, Yarn DLX, which can be used to run one-off scripts, a lot like npx, but it's actually a bit safer because it will only run downloaded scripts. Constraints is an incredibly interesting experimental feature launched in Yarn Berry. Constraints allow you to specify rules about your package dependencies that Yarn will ensure that these rules are not violated with every install. For example, you might want to make sure that all the packages in your workspace depend on the same version of a specific package, or that they specifically don't depend on a specific package. You can enforce that with constraints. Now, constraints are written in a language called Prolog, a logic programming language. The Yarn team caught some flack for going this direction, essentially using a special language as opposed to just JavaScript to implement this. But I think it's kind of brilliant. Prolog is specifically designed for these kind of scenarios and is set up to enforce such things. So what about performance? Let's actually take a look at some of the performance stuff. Oh my, just a moment here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the live performance benchmarks. Oh my. Oh shoot. There we go. Can everybody see that? Cool. So you just go to yarnpackage.com/benchmarks and you can see there are some differences between them. Really, you just need to kind of consider different scenarios as far as what you're doing. We can dig more into some of the details here as we move forward, but I do find it pretty interesting that on most of these, Yarn is either the fastest or definitely in the running for speed. So there's also going to be a difference here between the node modules implementation and the plug and play implementation. So definitely consider that. Oh, need to turn extend back on. Cool. Now, all those things are nice. They do improve the developer experience in a lot of ways. But the real star, in my mind, is the use of plug and play as an encouraged package install strategy. Plug and play is often shortened to PnP, and we'll use that acronym occasionally throughout the rest of the talk. Now, what is plug and play? In order to understand plug and play, we have to first understand what it's not, why it's different from the current method of package installation. Let's do to do that, we have to talk about Node. And when resolving module references, Node looks for the appropriate file in the Node modules folder, using a method called require.resolve. For our purposes, we don't have to know the ugly details of how resolve works. Frankly, I don't know how it works because I haven't had a need to. I leave that to package manager authors. Until I have a need, I have better things to do, like building software, taking hikes in the woods, and watching movies with my family. So, Node has resolved modules this way since the very beginning. Packages managers have to be compatible with Node's resolution logic. They have to do it Node's way, and that means copying files into Node modules. This takes time and introduces a variety of issues, some of which you may be familiar with. For example, creating folders nested so deeply that they can't be easily deleted. Thank you, Windows. Or a Node modules folder with more than 160,000 files and over a gigabyte in size. That's what I work with at my day job. Now, the web of package dependencies creates complex folder structures, and they always seem to get messed up. Now, you may have been through this scenario yourself. I'm about to tear my hair out trying to get my project to run. I'm getting inexplicable errors. So, in desperation, I delete the Node modules folder, reinstall, and magically everything starts working again. Sounds like a fantastic system, right? So, let's say that we want to avoid these issues. How do we get around this problem? It may seem intractable. We need our packages. Node needs them to be properly arranged in the Node modules folder. In a way, we're stuck. But how can we stop playing by Node's rules and start playing by our own rules? With plug and play, Yarn uses a unique and innovative strategy. It simply overrides Node's built-in methods for module resolution. JavaScript, as you may know, is so flexible that you can override core pieces of functionality and essentially say, hey, that thing that you normally do, oh, don't do that. Do this instead. It's a bit ridiculous, as we've encountered in some scenarios, but in this case, ridiculously useful. Yarn overrides require.resolve and FS, the file system API. This allows Yarn to get right in the middle of the module resolution process, enforcing its own rules and implementation. As a result, Yarn can store the packages however is most convenient for Yarn and for the user. What might a better system look like? Here's the way that Yarn Plug and Play lays it out. Yarn stores each package as a single file, a compressed zip archive in a dedicated Yarn cache folder. When Node needs a file from a package, Yarn intercepts the request, reaches into the zip archive, pulls out the requested file, and then hands it to Node. Node gets the file that it wants, Yarn can do perfect module resolution, and everyone is happy. The system is so much more compact than traditional Node modules, it enables you to commit the package cache to your Git repository. Yarn supports a workflow called zero installs, where a repository can be cloned, and then the application can be run immediately with no install step necessary. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've always been told the committed packages to source control is an anti-pattern. With Node modules, it absolutely was problematic. So many files taking up so much space, but the plug-and-play cache is so compact, it works quite smoothly. Now, zero installs isn't required. You don't have to commit your packages, your package cache, but it is a really convenient, reliable workflow. This means that your builds are no longer dependent on an external package repository, or network access for that matter. Everything that you need to build and run your application is part of your source control repo. In this scenario, you only need the package repository when adding or upgrading packages. Now, the bad news is not every project works with plug and play right out of the box. The Node ecosystem has been living with Node modules for a long time. Some packages and tools have come to expect the folder and have implemented code that isn't compatible with plug and play. Another potential challenge is that plug and play is more strict than using Node modules. The Node modules folder allows packages to reference other packages without actually declaring them as a dependency. Doing this has always been unsafe behavior. For instance, the package you depend on might choose to stop depending on that package that you're referencing, and suddenly it's gone. With plug and play, these unsafe access attempts are now called out as errors so that they can be fixed properly. The Yarn team has made huge efforts on fixing these kinds of problems in other popular projects, raising issues and making pull requests to help bring projects into compliance. These changes benefit not just Yarn users, but all package users. Because of this, should you encounter an error using a certain package with plug and play, you should first check that you're using the most recent version of that package. So sometimes the best strategy when upgrading, which will probably see later, is to actually delete your lock file and then reinstall, allowing it to upgrade those packages. Most popular libraries and frameworks are now compatible with plug and play, and many of them are moving to use Yarn 2 for building the projects themselves. Projects such as Babel and Jest are now using Yarn 2 internally. There are a couple standouts that don't support plug and play, namely React Native and Flow. I don't know if any of you work with those, but they do have problems with that install strategy. Both of these are still completely compatible with Yarn 2 by utilizing the built-in Node modules linker, which generates that classic Node modules folder. That's actually the default install strategy now, so that you can upgrade piece by piece. Let's talk about upgrading to Yarn 2 with plug and play. Upgrading your project to Yarn 2 is, for the most part, quite simple. Making your project compatible with plug and play is the more complex part. I absolutely recommend using plug and play, if you can, with your project. It's absolutely wonderful. But Yarn 2 also supports, like I said, it also supports working with Node modules. If you have a relatively simple project, perhaps a simple React app or Express server, upgrading to use plug and play may be trivial. I found that to be true in my case with some of the smaller projects that I've worked on. Other projects may encounter more challenges. Like we said, you can upgrade to Yarn 2 per project. In fact, that is pretty much the only upgrade route that is supported. So that means, it allows you to embed. So there's a version pinning. I'm sorry, I cut something out here. Since the release of Yarn 1.0, Yarn has supported a feature I like to call version pinning. Essentially, this allows you to embed a specific version of Yarn into your project. Once you've done this, everyone who runs Yarn on your project will use that embedded version, regardless of what version they installed globally. Now, this solves all kinds of projects, and you should do it on all your Yarn projects today, regardless of whether you move them to Yarn 2 or not. We've been using this feature for some time. It's made development a lot easier. Now, when you're upgrading to your project to Yarn 2, I highly recommend that you reference the migration docs. They're quite well put together, and they've drastically improved over time. I can tell you from experience, they're instructive and helpful when you encounter errors. Let's take a look at a couple examples. Give me a second here while I swap up displays. Any questions so far while I do this? Okay. Can you all, I'll give a font bump, obviously. Do you all prefer the black on white, or would you prefer to go to the light background? I know that some people prefer different. Okay. So we'll swap it up, right? You're happy with the dark? Dark mode's fine. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Okay. Hello? Did something? I think I screwed. Here we are. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a React app. And actually, I need to make sure I'm in the right. Escape. I need to make sure I'm in the right folder. There we go. We will go ahead and create a new React app. We will call this NDC demo. And you'll see it's going to do a classic Yarn installation. Takes a few seconds to install. Reaching out, grabbing these packages, building fresh packages. Node.jip is always our friend and enemy in these cases. You can kind of watch as we go through here, and if you want, we can compare some of the output from the Yarn as we do this. All right, so now that we know it's running, we'll just do a Yarn start. Oh, I have to jump into there. Nah, dumb. NDC demo. And we should see everything load properly. No big deal, right? All good. Now, the next step, we want to upgrade to Yarn 2. And that's very simple. We just say yarn set version Berry. That's going to download the Berry code, push it into the repository, and update the yarnrc.yaml to reference it. We'll now do a yarn to install our packages. Now this is going to, you can see here at the very top, migrating from Yarn 1, can automatically enabling the compatibility node modules linker. So as we're upgrading, this is not doing anything super different with the way it's installing the packages, so we shouldn't see really any significant compatibility changes. One thing to be aware of, Yarn Classic will still work for the foreseeable future, but there is not any significant active development on that branch. They will continue to probably do some small bug fixes and updating to make it so it works better with Yarn Berry, but don't expect to be too many changes there. So this is taking a little bit longer because it is using a slightly different strategy for downloading the packages. Even with this node modules linker, you can still commit the packages to your repository because they will be saved in a cache folder, which I'll show you in just a second here. The link step here is actually where it is taking those packages and copying them into node modules. And now we're done. So we'll just do a yarn start. Boom, app runs, no problem. Whoops. All right. Now, here comes the fun part, all right? We're going to open this up in code. Is that big enough? A little more? Okay, excellent. So you can see here we have a yarnrc.yaml. It's currently using the node modules linker. So, and you can see the yarn path here where it's referencing this specific release of Yarn Berry. And this is minified, so it makes it nice and compact when you commit it to your source control. You can also see all these cache files here, which are those zip files that Yarn has added. So you can commit that to your source control, and when it does the package install, it just has them right there. It doesn't have to download them at all. It will still need to copy them into node modules, obviously, but doesn't have other than that. So here in the yarnrc.yaml, all we have to do to upgrade to plug and play is change our node linker strategy. We'll go ahead and do a yarn. It's currently creating a couple of files as part of the link step, and then also deleting that node modules folder. All right, so you can see this pnp.cjs. That is the file that will actually tell it's what Yarn looks at to determine where to find the packages in these cache folders. All right, we'll go ahead and do a yarn start. Let's see what happens. Sometimes this just works with certain, with, for instance, a simple Express app. I've seen this just work no problem. Now, you'll see in this case, it did fail. It did not work in this case. And we can take a look at our error message to investigate a little bit. So this says, failed to load config React app to extend from. Now, I did a little research. It only took me a few minutes when I first encountered this. Basically, I searched for Yarn Berry and create React app and this error message. And what I discovered is that it actually does not depend on this package that it should. So there's an ESLint package that it actually depends on, but it doesn't list it in its dependencies. So that's why PnP can't find it. Because PnP is more strict in that way, enforcing that you have to specifically request it. So now that I've gone ahead and added that package, let's go ahead and start it again. No problems. Create React app works just fine. Pretty simple item to get your app upgraded. Now, obviously, a lot of apps are going to be more complex than that. So what we're going to do is we'll do the same migration on a real-world application that I actually used as the website for the conference that I run. So we will go ahead and cd. I just remembered I have it open in code already. Not that one. Did I kill it? I did. Here it is. So this is the Momentum website. This is our current primary branch, still running on Yarn Classic. To show you that it works, we'll just go ahead and run yarn develop. Oh, hold on. I hadn't reinstalled packages after the fact. This is referencing the global cache, so it's working pretty fast here. And we'll install all those packages into node modules. Any questions so far while we're waiting for some of these to run? Awesome. Okay, we're gonna, now we'll go ahead and start this up. And we're running. So with Yarn Classic, we're good to go as you would expect. Next step, we can actually, if you like, we can reference, so one of the easiest things to do, one of the nice things we can do, is we can reference these migration docs, which I mentioned earlier. They are super helpful, and there's a step-by-step walkthrough. So installing Yarn, upgrading to Yarn set version Berry, and then modifying your Yarn RC file, etc. So pretty easy to walk through these. For right now, we'll just do yarn set version berry. Boom. Okay, good to go. Now we can do a yarn, make sure that everything works with Yarn 2 in the classic node modules linker. Now, as I do this, you'll see that it's adding a whole bunch of files. You'll see when we're done here about 2,000 changes to the repository. Now, there's a couple different, there's a thing you want to look at here. There's essentially two different strategies for Yarn 2. If you're using 0 installs, this is what you want to add to your git ignore. Essentially, it will ignore everything under yarn star, and also, but then include these guys. If you're not using 0 installs, it's not going to include the cache, and I guess that's it. I think that's it. So it's basically saying, hey, just don't commit the cache if in that case. So here you see over 2,000 changes, and that's all these packages here. Now, if you're curious how big that is, we can do a little comparison. So first of all, this is the size of node modules, 482 megabytes. And then we can do the same thing with .yarn/cache. Oh, I did it wrong. Boom. 94 megs, which is still not insignificant, I think we can all agree, but drastically less than 482 megs. Not to mention, I'm forgetting the command right now, drastically less files. It's several orders of magnitude less files in that actual folder, because we've only got one file for each of those packages. All right, let's go ahead and start it up and see what we got. Now, again, this is running with the classic node modules linker. There's no real significant changes to the way node is working in this strategy. As you might expect, it should work without any issue. Ta-da! Beautiful, a nice, wonderful website. Now, let's get crazy. Time to upgrade to plug and play. We drop in here to the yarnrc.yaml. We'll change the node linker to PnP. Oh, nope. And then just run yarn to install using the plug and play strategy. It already has all those package files in the cache, which works out pretty well, and it's going to delete the node modules and create that pnp.cjs file that will tell Yarn where to find all the appropriate things when Node asks for them. Okay, this one failed with errors, I think. Let's take a look here. What version of Node am I running? All right, that seems correct. And, that's right. So one of the things that we want to do here is when I found it best to go ahead and delete the yarn.lock to make sure that we upgrade to the most recent version of our packages, because many of them are old and we have to, the changes that enable working with plug and play have been merged after that package was published. All right, let's take a look. Result of yarn building a package. Post install. All right. Let's fill with errors. Okay, this is different. Kind of throw me off a little. Thanks for your patience. I don't recall encountering this issue. Let's see here. Any questions while I look at this? I'm trying to remember what this one is. Ah, okay. That's right. So I'm going to take this here. This will actually play in well to our next discussion item. Believe we want this here. Okay, let's try this. No, that's not it. Okay. So there's a few things we want to look at while we're doing this. One of the things is running the Yarn Doctor. And it will specifically let us know if there's any issues that it can detect with our upgrade. All right. It's letting us know that the ESM support for plug and play uses the experimental loader API and is therefore experimental. That's all it's got. So this was giving me slightly different output than I expected, so we might move on because I don't want to troubleshoot this right in front of you. Okay, so all right. One of the things to consider, so anytime you encounter an error while you're trying to upgrade to plug and play, the best thing to do is go ahead and reference the migration docs and look at the various troubleshooting that they offer. One of the easiest things to do is there is a loose mode for plug and play that allows you to actually reference packages that you don't depend on. So it uses the classic node modules linker to actually find the potential references and then actually work with those. It's not great, but it does the job pretty well. It also there's ways in which if you have a dependent package that references something and it doesn't depend on it specifically, you can add exclusions in there so that Yarn says, oh, okay, I'll make that work even though that package doesn't have it. The best thing to do is for that package to update its dependencies, and you can even make a pull request to that repository, but it's a way around it until that gets fixed. Kind of another cool feature that Yarn includes is the ability to use a patch package. And essentially what that will do is you can commit a tiny git patch and it will apply that patch to the package as it's being installed. That's actually the way that Yarn has enabled TypeScript support, because TypeScript refuses to enable the plugins that Yarn needs to do the module resolution. So as Yarn is installing the TypeScript package, it will apply the necessary patch, which is really just a few lines, and then the TypeScript works perfectly with Yarn plug and play. So there are great editor support as well. You can look into that. Really, usually it's just installing a few extensions. There's actually commands that you can run here that are super easy. Yarn DLX SDKs, and then you can list the SDKs that you want installed. For example, VS Code, which is nicely supported. And then make sure this is what I was talking about here, it's the package extensions. So essentially, if React forgot to list its dependency on prop types, you would simply list that there in your yarnrc.yaml. Any questions about that before we move on? Cool. So is plug and play right for you? Let's discuss. The first thing that I would recommend is go ahead and upgrade to Yarn 2. If you're already using Yarn, Yarn 2 is a very simple upgrade. It offers a lot of advantages, and you will be on the modern development branch of Yarn. It frankly is even better than classic Yarn for node modules installations because of some of the tiny edge case bugs that they solved as a result of the refactor they've done. So highly recommend that. Next step is determine whether you want to use plug and play. It does offer quite a few advantages that you might imagine, as I've listed before, but there are certainly some challenges because it has not been fully adopted by the node ecosystem. So there's a lot of things that packages and people have done over the years, for instance, expecting node modules to be there, where it isn't fully compatible with plug and play. And it may cost you a little bit of hassle in enabling certain plugins and things like that. Something to consider when you're doing that. I've used it, like I said, on simple projects. It works extremely well for me. Zero installs is fantastic. One of the things that I think is important considering is, within zero installs, is the capability to switch between branches without doing a install. So if you're frequently switching between branches, oftentimes you have to pull down the branch and then do an install. It has to fetch all the packages and change everything around. If you're already committing those packages to the repository, switching branches does that for you. You don't have to worry about that install step to take that time and do those things. It also means that if you're getting on a flight, you download the repository and you're pretty much good to go in most cases to run it, as long as it has those packages committed. So, something to consider. What makes Yarn different? I love that Yarn is always innovating, pushing the boundaries, and not just accepting the status quo, but also continuing to release a solid, fast, polished package manager. I love some of the changes that they've made recently to make it easier to adopt. For example, when they first launched Yarn 2, the plug-and-play installer was the default installation strategy, and it caused a lot of friction with people coming on board. Since then, the maintainer has listened to some of the feedback and decided to revert to using node modules as the default install strategy for projects that were already using it, which creates a great onboarding experience comparatively. Obviously, I think you should give Yarn 2 a try. It has a lot of great new features and the potential to make building node apps more convenient and reliable. If there's something that could be improved, you can contribute to the project or even build a plugin. I've contributed a few times myself by opening issues and making updates to the documentation. I've always found Mail and the rest of the team to be helpful and eager to collaborate. Thank you all so much for attending my talk. Feel free to reach out to me on social media and let me know what you think of Yarn 2. You can find all my details on Linktree at linktree/accidentaldeveloper. And thank you for coming. Any questions?
One small question.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're making a project without using Create tab,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm using Webpack,
Sure.
right? So is there any complexity on that?
So Webpack, as long as you're using the newer versions, is completely compatible with Yarn Plug and Play. That's one of the places where they have made specific efforts in other packages to say, hey, we want to help you make the changes that are necessary to make this work. Usually those changes are not like, oh, you've got to do this special thing to work with Yarn. It's, you're doing this thing that isn't good, and we'll help you update the code to do the right thing. So modern Webpack is supported. In fact, on the Yarn website, I'll switch back to mirroring so you can see what I see. Oh gosh. Keep getting this. There we go. Okay, yarnpackage.com. On the Yarn website, or maybe it's the GitHub site. I always forget where it is. Essentially, they run end-to-end tests on a regular basis against various tooling. So here you can see end-to-end Webpack. So it's running against Webpack, making sure continuously that it's working properly with plug and play. So there is a couple that are failing right now, and usually what's happening is they have issues open with that package to resolve those issues. So
And there will be no problem if I'm using Yarn Berry and trying to work on different microfrontends.
absolutely, yeah. So for example, if you're doing micro front ends, I'm not sure if you're using a monorepo approach or what approach you're using, but
I'm using my module federation, for example.
I'm sorry, say again?
Module federation.
Okay. Yeah, so you can enable it on a project-by-project basis. So let's say that you're ready to use Yarn Berry in one of the projects, but not in the others. And then you can bring them along as it makes sense. Any other questions? Did that fully answer your questions? Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? Yarn 2 and 3 don't have a lot of significant differences. Yarn 3 has a lot of kind of improvements, performance, fit and finish, deprecating a few APIs. Essentially, they're adopting a Semver strategy so that they can take out APIs that they're realizing don't make sense and put in new ones in a compatible manner. So that if you happen to be using Yarn 2 and you're using an API that's deprecated, you won't be automatically upgraded to the Yarn 3. Just the classic Semver strategy. And obviously, 1 to 2 was a huge difference. 2 to 3, pretty minor. For my purposes, I've not noticed any significant changes except just a little bit nicer developer experience. Other questions? All right. Sorry?
I got another one.
Great, thank you.
Is it better to, let's say you have to upgrade some vulnerabilities, is it better to upgrade to Yarn 2 and then do the upgrade to vulnerabilities, Yarn audits?
Gotcha. That's a good question. I don't really have a good answer to that. I don't think it'll make too much difference. The order that you do those in would be my guess. Essentially, they're running. You said vulnerabilities, right? Yeah. So essentially, the vulnerabilities are going to be the packages under the covers. To a large extent, Yarn doesn't care which packages you're installing. Its job is to make sure it installs them properly and does the right things. And so if you are taking care of vulnerabilities, you're probably going to be upgrading packages to a large extent, which is going to make your process easier, especially when you're going to plug and play. Did that help answer your question? Did that answer your question? Or cool.
So I guess follow the MIT
Yeah.
Which NPM packages are MIT licensed that are reliable, right?
Which NPM packages?
Like the NPM packages, those are MIT licensed, like those are reliable. So check those things. Right?
Yeah. Cool. So also it is compatible with ESBuild. I found that out today. They're actually using ESBuild to build Yarn, which I think is pretty cool. I'm not sure if you are familiar with ESBuild yet. It's kind of incredible. A lot of the newer frameworks are starting to use it. I think Snowpack uses it beneath the covers, but essentially it's built in Go, and it's ridiculously fast compared to something like Webpack. So but all you need is a plugin to enable compatibility between Yarn Plug and Play and ESBuild. So I found that pretty cool. Cool. If that's all, we can be done. I appreciate your time. I hope that you enjoyed it, and definitely reach out if you have any questions.